Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Katie Schauer, and I'll be your host for our webinar today. You've joined us for Experts on Tap, which is the next in our series of Experts on Tap webinars. Before we begin with our presentation, I would just like to let you know that we will have all lines muted, so please use the Q&A and chat boxes for any questions. We will answer those at the end of the session as we have time. We are recording today's session, and we will be posting that to our website later this week. We will also be sending it out to all participants and registrants so that you can review the webinar and share it with your colleagues. Once again, feel free to utilize Q&A and chat boxes for any questions. And with that, I will hand it over to Jason Paquette.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. I'm the marketing manager here at InSource. And before we start, I'd like to talk a little bit about our purpose here at InSource and our vision and unifying principles. InSource is a company with a strong culture, clear sense of purpose, as well as a unique approach to fulfilling that purpose. This is relevant in that it allows us to establish fit more quickly, knowing our strengths, and we work best with clients that have similar values and culture. So from edge to enterprise, we operationalize digital solutions to deliver transformational results. Our ultimate vision is to revitalize manufacturing in America, and today we are heavily invested in making the industrial digital revolution a reality for thousands of industrial companies. We bring Industry 4.0 technology and beyond to the table, and then we add our secret sauce, I like to say, that helps companies truly integrate those technologies in their processes and routines. In other words, what's really unique about InSource is that we operationalize manufacturing IT solutions. So we've created this Experts on Tap to do a little deeper dive into different topics, and these are meant to be quick, 30-minute webinars. So with that, today we've got our expert, Glenn Yancey, and he'll go through modernizing the InTouch application manager and with InTouch. So, Glenn?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, Katie. So today we're going to go through some features of what is new in InTouch 2020. And some of those features have to do with the application manager of InTouch and how it's become a little bit more modern in the user interface or user experience, as well as the workflow for creating a new application. Then beyond that, we're going to discuss this concept of industrial graphics and what is that? What happened to our Kestra graphics? And what is this Aviva Connect? We're going to discuss that and how it's relevant to InTouch 2020, as well as a new feature called the carousel widget. So we'll discuss that. And then afterwards, we're going to get into InTouch web and mobile apps. So we're going to discuss how there's a web server that has that can be used for read-write access, acknowledging alarms, and publishing your entire InTouch application. And then towards the end, we'll discuss a newer way in 2020 to integrate your tags with your historian server. And for me, this feature is probably one of the cooler features. Not to say everything else is not cool, but as a database nerd, this makes life so much easier as far as importing your tags into the historian through an automated fashion. So first, we're going to discuss what is new with the application manager. And as you can see, the application manager does have a new look and feel to it. And there's 3 different views that we can choose from inside of that to give us a bit more detail about that application. So the purpose of the application manager, by the way, is for one to choose what is the default application that my operators will end up using on this station. So we'll discuss how the different views are used, and we'll discuss a new workflow with defining a new application. So in the application manager in 2020, this new user interface now has the ability to show previews of your application. And it is possible that as a system integrator or even as an end customer, I may have multiple applications that an operator may choose, but they may have same names or similar names, and I want to at least visualize what's the difference between the two. Well, having thumbnails that I can define now in the application manager can at least give me a preview of that application before opening it up. So we have this one view called a list view, which is merely just showing those previews that we were mentioning a little earlier. And then the detailed view, which is probably the more traditional view that people have had in the past when opening up the InTouch Application Manager. And then we have the tiled view, which has the same thing that we saw in the list view, but a little bit more information such as descriptions and so forth about that application. Now, the Application Manager, as we mentioned, is where you choose your default application. And then from that, you open up Window Maker for your editing, or you open up Window Viewer for compiling that application for use by the operator or end user. But when developing a new application, you're going to see a little red or pink circle with a plus sign in there, and that is for creating a new application. So in the process, the workflow has changed a bit. InTouch 2020 now allows you to create templates. A template could be, I want to define an application that has a set navigation area on the left, a banner area at the top, maybe an alarm banner at the bottom, and then on the middle right, I'd like to have an area that's perhaps the body of my application, the thing that is more dynamic to where I can switch between different process views inside of my facility. So I could create a template with just that type of layout for my application and reuse that over and over again. So especially as a system integrator, I'd like to have my own signature in the form of the way that I lay out an application that is most intuitive for an operator to use. Then I save that template, and now I have that option to choose when I create a new application. Do I want to utilize those templates or just start from scratch? Then the next phase after that is what you want to name it. What directory is it going to go into? What's going to be the resolution? And there's some preset resolutions that are in there that you could choose, or you can define your own custom resolution if you're spanning across 2 or 3 monitors. So this is also designed in 2020 to be a little bit more user-friendly for multiple monitors. But there's also the option of converting an application up to 2020. Now in 2020, there is no such thing as a modern application anymore. They're all just standalone. But the standalone applications now have the orchestra graphics that are embedded into it or native to it. But as we'll discuss in a little bit, that word orchestra graphics will be kind of going out of fashion. But at least the standalone application is going to be what's more native to 2020 of InTouch. So if you do have a managed or a modern application that was created in 2014 or 2 or 2017, it's going to give you the option to migrate that to a standalone, but just keep in mind, you're not going to lose your graphics. It's going to keep your graphics in there, but it does create a more native form to where the application is not as top-heavy as it would be in the past with those newer graphics. So as far as everything else, once you get into Window Maker, everything else will still be the same as far as that is concerned. There will be some new features here and there. Your graphic toolbox will most likely end up showing up on the right and any properties that belong to that. So you're still going to have that same look and feel once you're in Window Maker. But the graphics we were mentioning, the orchestra graphics, they've changed names. It's now called industrial graphics. And when you create an industrial graphic, these industrial graphics are all vector-based, which means they're resolution neutral. They allow you to take a graphic, and if you resize your resolution on a monitor that is going from standard to a widescreen, the graphic can easily re-render so that the graphic appears smooth rather than pixelated. So that's one of the main purposes of these vector graphics that we used to call orchestra graphics, but now we call them industrial graphics in 2020. This means that I can also share this across our Aviva portfolio, not with just InTouch, but with Aviva Edge, with InTouch OMI, with Insight, which is our historical web portal, and SciTech, which now we're calling PlantSCADA. So these industrial graphics will now be native to all of those other programs that are under the Aviva belt, and I can utilize one feature, one interface to develop these graphics, to develop this standard library, and then share that library across all those different platforms. So just as a rehash of the first part, there is no such thing as a modern application. Standalone applications now will contain these industrial graphics native to them. So that means you don't have to install any SQL Server Express with InTouch unless you're going to do some alarming, but still it's not necessarily required anymore for the development side. So that kind of goes away. You can still choose to install it, but it's not a requirement anymore. So your modern applications now become standalone with those industrial graphics as part of those. So with those graphics in mind, most people are, or many people are still utilizing pixel-based graphics. That's kind of the format that we've used for 20, 30 years since InTouch has been out. And InTouch has been, as I was mentioning, has been out for more than 30 years, since 1987. And we can still take an application from that version and convert that to 2020 at our current version. So we still have that legacy of taking the oldest version and converting that to now. But once you do have your windows, a lot of those graphics in there are still going to be pixel-based. So we do have the option to say, right-click on that window, making sure that all windows are closed when you do this, and say convert to industrial graphic. So it vectorizes all those graphics, all those pixel-based graphics in that screen. After you choose which window you'd like to convert, then it goes through the process of converting that to a vector-based graphic. Now, in that, by the way, there will be a Windows conversion report that you would select. And all that's really going to do is to say, here are some potential issues where the window converted partially but not completely. And for those things that partially converted, then you'll still be able to utilize. So after that process, that reactor window that I've created is now vectorized. Now you may look at it and say to yourself, it doesn't really look any different. Well, it doesn't necessarily add the gradients and everything else in there, but it does put you in a position to where you can start to add those shadings and gradients and give it a much more modern feel. But it doesn't necessarily change the whole look of it yet, unless I were to change the resolution, and it will easily adapt to that. So once we have this in an industrial graphic format, then I could say, let me go ahead and share this across into a shared location where other programs that are part of the Viva portfolio can utilize those same graphics, to where I've developed them in InTouch, but now I want to show them in Viva Edge or SciTech, which we now call PlantSCADA, or even InSight, which is our web portal. I can develop once and share across those multiple platforms. Now, also what is new is the ability to create HTML5 widgets inside of our graphic interface. So in this case, this carousel widget that we're discussing is kind of like a kiosk. So when you go to the mall and you see a map of where you're at in the mall, most likely you will also see a screen there that is constantly rotating across 4 or 5 different advertisements for stores in the mall, or maybe just the weather and some little news outfit like CNN or Fox News may be showing up on those kiosks. Well, a kiosk in our terms for this widget will rotate through the graphics you defined in there. So if you do have a screen that is like a 4K monitor or a large HD monitor, and I want to show off my application to potential visitors that are coming in, as well as the operators in my control room, I can at least have one view that is rotating across all of those different views or windows that exist in that application. So this just kind of shows that process of it rotating. As long as you define what those windows are, it will then rotate through those graphics. So the next phase, because we're all building them on top of each other for these features, now those graphics, the ability to share them is now inside of InTouch 2020. You will see a new Aviva button at the top and something called the Aviva Connect, which takes you to the Aviva Cloud. Now what that does is it still allows you to define your graphics and share that across the portfolio, as we had mentioned before. So this just kind of reiterates those concepts that we're mentioning a little bit earlier of develop once and share across multiple platforms. But Integration Studio, that is part of that Aviva Connect button that we saw, also allows me, if I have a development license and I've registered on this website, will allow me to create my own sandbox environment in the cloud. So this sandbox environment will allow me to define a project name. So in this case, I called it City of Atlantis. And my description for this is a conversion. And in this process, I'm developing my own environment. So I can choose the version of InTouch that has my original application, so I can make some modifications before I convert to 2020. So this is giving me access to something like InTouch 10.1, which is probably going back more than 10 years of where InTouch was back then. But I can take an application developed in that, modify it however needs be, and then import that into my InTouch application to migrate that to 2020. So this at least gives me the framework to have that sandbox application for me to work with InTouch. So the next phase you see in there is how many nodes in that project will end up being created. And I created my own water treatment plant control room, and you can choose the machine type. In other words, how much CPU and RAM will be utilized. Now, this does require a couple things: a development license, and on top of that, there is a bit of a fee that is in form of credits that get utilized for how long your machine has been up and running. So you'll see something in here that mentions how often per hour will that end up getting charged for that machine running in the cloud. But you can also define when that machine shuts off, such as 5 o'clock every day, so it's not running overnight, incurring more charges. So the Integration Studio is very useful for people that need to access older versions of the application and still make those modifications to bring up into the current version. So it's great for system integrators and even other customers that have multiple applications to maintain. So the next phase, building on top of all this, is the InTouch Web HMI. So InTouch Web HMI is not completely replacing InTouch Access Anywhere, and we'll discuss the differences between the two. But with InTouch Web HMI, this is a full read-write capability that started in 2020. In 2017, we had a version, but it was read-only, and you can only publish individual graphics to the web interface. But this allows you to take your entire application and convert that to HTML5 so that a browser such as Chrome or Firefox or Safari or even Microsoft Edge could consume that application, provided that you have security, you have the URL, and a few other things. Beyond that, then everything should work fine. Now, this does not require IIS or Internet Information Services, nor does it require remote desktop services. So no terminal server licenses or RDS licenses are required for those CALs. You don't need them. This works right out of the box and even does not require a server-based operating system. You can run this on Windows 10 and so forth, and still have your own little internal web server and access to that web server. Now, where InTouch Access Anywhere is a little bit different, and this is just from my experience, InTouch Access Anywhere is typically better for more external use, where I need to connect from outside the plant inside the plant. That's not to say you can't do that with a web client, but that's typically where we've seen InTouch Access Anywhere utilized a little bit more. And that itself required remote desktop services and a server-based operating system. But the web client that we're discussing right now does not require either of those. It is fully read-write. It has a much lower footprint and can be used with any web browser that is HTML5 compatible. Now, with your web client, you will need to use vector-based graphics or industrial graphics. It does not work well with the traditional pixel-based. So that's why I showed a little bit earlier the concept of converting graphics from pixel to industrial so that they are vectorized so that they can be consumed in a web-based format. And once everything is in a web-based format, then we can also utilize a mobile application on top of that, which we'll see in a little bit. But a mobile application just means I can use an iOS app or an Android app and gain access, hopefully internally through a VPN to my application. So this just shows the responsiveness of switching through different windows in my application, and you can still see this is a URL that has been accessed. And in that process, I'm also logging in. So this is just not a blank, anybody has access to this application. You still have to have your security credentials pass through the security mode that you've chosen into InTouch. So once I've logged in, then there are things in there that I can do, such as selecting alarms. I could change set points. I could change states for a valve to open it, or a pump to turn on, or a motor. And then I can even acknowledge my alarms by selecting that alarm and supplying a content or supplying a comment. And then in my alarm history, either through here in the web or on the actual machine itself, where I'm running a fat client version of it, I can see who acknowledged those alarms and when that alarm was acknowledged. So I still have all that capabilities through this web, but now with the read-write capability coming in 2020, I can do a lot more as far as interaction rather than just monitoring and changing windows. On the mobile side, I can then connect into that same web server, supplying the server name and my user credentials, and now I have access through my Android phone or Apple phone or iOS to select alarms, change set points, acknowledge alarms, and all of that. Now, the last new feature that I want to discuss that to me is really cool is this new way of integrating your tags that exist in InTouch to your historian. Now, in the past, what we've had to do is we've had to open up the historian through the System Management Console. There's a process of right-clicking on the Management Console to import your tags, and there's a lot of steps that you had to go through in that process. Here, you don't have to do that anymore. I can just select inside of Window Maker the properties for historical logging to say, let me enable storage to the historian. I supply my historian name. I supply a directory to buffer data in the event that I cannot communicate to my historian. I can at least do some storing before I forward that data over to the historian. So that is now something part of 2020. It's just a new setting. But you still have to choose in the tag name dictionary which tags will be sent to the historian. That is where this log data checkbox is utilized. So for every tag you create, you will hopefully hit that. And then once you go into Window Viewer, that's the sign to tell the historian, hey, here are the tags that I'm now going to import for you. And now the historian just accepts those as any other tag that we may have had for System Platform. It treats them in the same manner. So the tags for InTouch will no longer be under the IDAS portion. For those that are familiar with how the historian and the IDAS worked, the IDAS was a container for InTouch-based tags. It stood for Industrial Data Acquisition Service, but it really was just kind of short for InTouch tags. Whereas manual tags was kind of known for tags that belonged to SciTech or System Platform. But now the manual tags are there because InTouch is doing all the acquisition for the historian, pushing or force-feeding those values to the historian, and now my tags show up here on the left, and then when I need to access them for historian client trend or query or Excel for the workbook option, then I can pull in those tags and start to trend or retrieve the values of them, just like I've done in the past. But this process did not require me to go into the System Management Console to perform imports again and commit pending changes. I can now just do this from a few checkboxes in InTouch and leave a lot less administration for me in the System Management Console for the historian server. So that, to me, is a very cool feature in 2020 that saves a lot of work from having to go through import process anytime I add a new tag into the system. So with all that being said, I just want to say thank you guys very much for sitting in and seeing some of the newer features that have come across in 2020. And I will go ahead and turn this back over to Katie.
Sorry about that. Had to unmute myself. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to utilize the Q&A and chat box, and we'll be happy to answer those. Just a reminder that we do have this recorded, and we will be posting that to our website, and we'll be sending that out to you later this week, possibly early next week. I don't see any questions at this point, Glenn. So I'm going to say that if you do have further questions, feel free to contact us via the website, insource.solutions, or communications@insourcess.com. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks for our next Experts on Tap webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.